Welcome to Perfect WHELM, the podcast that helps you navigate the fine line between stagnation and high anxiety, and find that sweet spot where you can grow, thrive, and create a life of purpose without burning out. I'm your host, Eric Slavosky, and each week we'll explore topics like values, beliefs, resilience, and goal setting, giving you the tools and inspiration to create a life that feels both meaningful and sustainable. Are you ready to step away from extreme feelings of underwhelm and overwhelm and into that just right zone of perfect whelm? You're in the right place. Let's get started. Hi, everyone, and hey, thanks for coming along again on this journey on Perfect WHELM podcast. And whether you're a first-time listener or maybe you tune in and have listened to multiple episodes, either way, I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart for joining me on this podcast journey. Getting close to that 30 episode mark now. Actually, I think we're just beyond that, and I think that this has just been so much fun for me. Only been at it a little over 3 months, but it's certainly been a labor of love. And the guests that I've had thus far in this Women in the World series has just been fabulous. And I know you're going to love today's guest. In fact, this interview, I had to divide into 2 episodes. So you're going to want to check out part 1 today, but then also make sure that you catch my next release, which will be part 2 of this just fantastic conversation that I had with today's guest. So now let me introduce today's guest. Carrie K.C. West is a #1 international best-selling author. She's also a speaker and a narrative coach who uses her entertainment industry experience to support clients with their life and business stories. A well-developed, balanced story brings fulfillment and success in business, relationships, and life. Carrie helps people and businesses change the underlying stories that impede their abilities for success. Carrie is a sought-after speaker, webinar leader, and author of the book Life Rewritten. We're going to talk a lot more about that book in today's episode. She launched her book in March of 2025, and you can find her at Carrie, CarrieKC West.com. So, Carrie West, welcome to the Perfect WHELM podcast. It's great to have you on today.
Thank you. I've been excitedly waiting for this.
Yeah, me too. I can't wait to jump into our content matter today. I was reading your book just the other night, and gosh, it was just I don't know, just so enjoyable. I learned so much. I really can't wait to dig in. But before we do that, could you tell us a little bit more about yourself? Maybe places you've called home, maybe a few adjectives that you would use to describe yourself, and maybe tell us a couple of things that you like to do in your spare time.
Well, I'll try to take those in order, but I can't guarantee it. When you say my places I've called home, it's funny. Even though I was born in Pennsylvania, I don't consider Pennsylvania my home. I loved when I lived in Washington, D.C. That was probably my second favorite place. But then when we moved to California, and I've been in California since I came out here for film school in the 90s, and I never thought I would stay, but California works for me. I love it here. I like being near the ocean. I like that we don't have snow in the wintertime. And yet, if you want snow, you can drive up to Mammoth or get over to any ski area around, and it's pretty easy. So I like that. I like the convenience of it. I love the variety in California. You know, driving up the coast is remarkable, and seeing that whole skyline and that whole view. Plus, they have some pretty darn good wineries. I think some of the best wineries are in the central coast of California. Sorry, Sonoma and Napa. I know I'll be in trouble for people like that, but Santa Maria has some of the greatest wineries. Plus, if you do the Sideways tour, the movie Sideways, and go through Santa Barbara County, great wineries, and we've done that Sideways tour, and it's pretty amazing. Um, so that's California is really my favorite. I love traveling to Hawaii. When my sister lived in Hawaii, it was really easy. And plus, living out here, people would travel to Hawaii, much like on the East Coast, you'd go to the Caribbean. So it's pretty easy. I haven't been in a while and I miss it terribly. But I've been working so much on this book in my business, so we haven't had a chance to get there just yet. Um, but yeah, California is probably my favorite home space, and DC was second. I loved living in the city in DC. It was a lot of fun there. Um, you asked about hobbies or what I do in my spare time. Well, I mentioned this at one point when we were talking before recording, but we have a dog, a Shih Tzu, who owns me. He owns me heart and soul. Um, and he's my shadow. I think he imprinted on me. We got him when he was a puppy. So he spent a lot of time with me. And now he's almost 4 years old and he comes with me everywhere, everywhere, and loves being in the car, loves doing everything. And I just adore him. I don't have children, but when I think about this dog, my heart just explodes with love. And I imagine that's what parents feel for their kids. And I'm not trying to equate a dog with having a human child. I'm really not. But he is definitely a fur baby child, definitely. And I have never known that kind of love until I got this dog. And it doesn't mean you don't discipline him. It doesn't mean you don't worry about him. It doesn't mean you don't send him to his room without dinner every once in a while when he misbehaves. But he's just amazing. And Simon, my partner, has often said to me, "I'm glad you didn't have kids because you're such a helicopter mom with the dog. You'd probably be driving the kids to work even in their 30s." And I thought, I that might be true. I just I know that that's not what you're supposed to do, but I think I think I would have that kind of worry and fear and wanting to keep a tough eye on them. So that's that. But other than that, nature, taking advantage of all this beautiful nature. We are blessed with a wonderful backyard that we have turned into a bit of a sanctuary that we can just go. We have a lot of privacy for living in California. We have a lot of privacy in our backyard, and we have a fence around and a chair that's surrounded by trees. And I'll go out and read. I'll just go out and read, and that's a really good time for me to decompress too.
No, I love that. We've relocated to southern Utah now, and so we just have a preserve out behind our house, and it's sunny a lot, and there's a lot of beautiful vegetation out there. There's red rocks and mountains, and
Oh,
I like just going out back and reading too. So I really relate to
yeah.
that. And in California, you mentioned just the sheer beauty of the place too, and I think you have just so much diversity. If you want the snow, if you want, I mean, you have desert, you have coast, you have
Yeah.
mountains. And so I felt that draw kind of early in my life too with California and almost ended up going to college there. And I'm kind of happy that we've moved out in Southern Utah. Now I can be in Southern California in, 5 or 6 hours or out to Monterey or
Yeah.
someplace
Yeah.
beautiful. And
Yeah.
so, but yeah, then of course what you said about the dogs too, totally relate to that. We're, dog lovers and, our dogs sound a little bit bigger than the dogs that you have, but, when our dogs start wrestling around in the living room, it's like we always say they're rearranging furniture, 'cause they're both over 100 pounds, but they're easygoing, gentle giants, and like you said, they really do become members of the family, and we spoil them rotten too.
Oh, yeah. Oh,
But no,
yeah.
I really appreciate you sharing those things about yourself, and if you would tell us, what was life like for you growing up? I'm curious. Like, what was your childhood like, and maybe a few events that stand out for you early in life?
Well, I'm trying to think of the right word to use because usually I cuss at this point and say my childhood was pretty crappy, and I use a different word for it. So
And
I'm
you
trying.
can fully do that anytime in this
Okay.
interview. You have the license and freedom to do that.
Okay. Well, I say it in my book. My childhood was pretty shitty. And in some ways, almost literally, um, my mom had mental health issues that I wasn't aware of until a little bit older. And so she rejected me on the day I was born. So in the hospital, when the nurse tried to give me to her, she didn't want me. And my dad didn't want me. My dad didn't want any more kids. He had two. He felt that my mom tricked him into having me. So I came into this life and I've always used this analogy. When we're born, and this is my entertainment industry background and my theater background. When you go to a play or when you watch a movie, have you ever been late for a movie where you miss the first 20 minutes because of traffic or tickets or
Mm.
whatever? And you walk into the theater and they're already well underway and you're like, what happened? What happened? I got to catch up. And what happened then? And, because the first 20 minutes are when you get the backstory and the whole setup of who the hero is and who are we supposed to root for, who we're going on this journey with. Well, when you're born, it is like you walk into this middle of the theater and you're trying to figure out who are all these people? What are they doing? What's their backstory? Who am I? Where do I fit into this story? So you're just trying to get a sense. And plus, you were pulled from this pretty comfortable, warm, safe space into this bright light, tons of noise, and you have no idea what the heck's going on. Now, studies have been done that say we're more aware as babies than people think. Sometimes people think that when you're a baby, you don't even. Not so. Not so. We start observing and learning from the first moment we take that breath. And so those first moments are critical, super critical to establishing who you are. Our brains are functioning and they're trying to make sense of everything constantly. Our brains are very much interested in coherence. They're interested in organization. They're interested in sorting out information in a way that's usable. They're not good. The brain is not done to make everything a mesh. They're done to organize information to help us in our lives. And so if the first experience you have as being born is somebody pushing you away and saying, "Yeah," that gets imprinted on you. And so I started my life with this feeling that I was deeply flawed or there was something wrong with me because my mother, for the first 2 years, I struggled. I had a rough time of it. My mom wouldn't feed me all the time. She hated changing diapers, which I can understand that, when at that time, it was the late '50s, you had cloth diapers and you had to wash them. And a newborn has tons of diapers, and she only had this. I remember the washing machine. It was a washing machine that had it was just a big standing bucket of water, and then when you were rinsing it, you had to empty the water, refill it, rinse it, and it had rollers to pull the clothes through to get all the heavy water out. And then you had to hang them on the drying line outside. She didn't have a dryer, and in this wintertime, we had an indoor space near the furnace where she would hang things to dry. So it was not an easy process, and she hated doing it. Plus, she was having postpartum, plus, she was having challenges, plus, she had two other kids. So she didn't really want anything to do with me. In many ways, I could say now, from this perspective, it really wasn't about me, and it wasn't. But at the time, it felt like there was something so completely wrong with me. And what it did was it traumatized me. Every day, I never knew if I was going to get fed. I knew I wasn't going to get cuddled. But I also knew if I started crying and I wouldn't start saying I needed something, because, babies cry when they need something, mom would put me in the closet. In my room, she'd just put me in the closet and say, "I don't wanna deal with this." So, I didn't have a very good start at all. And one of the things I learned to do to comfort myself is and I remember this, I don't even know I can't tell you how old I was, but I remember thinking, telling myself a story. My real parents are looking for me, and when they find me, I created this perfect life of what I thought it would be like to have somebody who would like to cuddle me in a rocking chair and, give me a bottle and give me fresh food and really take good care of me. And that's how I took care. Kids are very good at self-care. That was one of my self-care techniques as a child.
I was really struck by that when I was reading your book and just those early, years for you, especially the first couple years, as you mentioned. And, what it brought back for me too is, when I was in my early 20s, I was studying, was majoring in psychology, and which I think we also share that in common. But I was a psych major. I wanted to help people, but I was also probably motivated by trying to figure myself out to some degree, and a lot of the things that I was experiencing at that part of my life or during that part of my life. But I remember I got a job shortly. I went into the military after college, and I came out. I didn't quite have my degree finished, but I got a health department to hire me on as a case manager. So I ended up working a lot with kids who were going through a lot of difficulties as teens, but they essentially, many of them were unattached. And so it was the first time I really came across learning about, okay, these were kids that for the first sometimes year, 2 years of their life weren't getting diapers changed, weren't getting fed on schedule, weren't being cuddled, and I thought to myself, yeah, wow, that's really important foundational stuff, right? A baby will coo, for example, when it feels that sense of contentment, or it'll giggle,
Yeah,
or it'll smile. And I started realizing for these children, they didn't have those, and I learned too that it was, a lot of it's biological, that, there's neurological connections and
yeah,
pathways that a baby needs to be formed
yeah,
in the brain that comes from just those basic care needs, right, that you were
that's
talking
right,
about. And when they're
that's
not
right.
being met, there ends up being a real gap, a real deficiency in the development of the child. So when you were sharing that in your book, boy, it just hit me like a ton of bricks of, like you said, you're coming into this story, and right off the bat, you're at a huge, I guess you could say, disadvantage in life, because your very survival is
Yep.
being compromised. Your physiological needs, your emotional needs, and I think especially with a baby, those things are just so vital. So, that really struck me. So you shared a little bit then about the early development of this narrative, and sort of the power of this story in your life. How old were you, like, when you started to talk about imagining sort of this sense of, I don't know, comfort, this place of peace that almost like carried you through? I think in the book you say it helped carry you through dark moments. When do you think, like, you first really became aware of that, that you actually had the power or the imagination to do that? Do you recall kind of when that became real for you, that you could take yourself away from the very harmful realities that you were dealing with as a young child?
Well, you mentioned my popcorn story,
Yes.
which I
Yeah, and I
think
was gonna get into that, so maybe we
yeah,
could just
yeah,
go there.
no,
Yeah,
let's go
let's
for
go.
it.
Because this kinda connects to origin stories, I believe, too, which I
Absolutely.
think so much power and connection here, so let's go.
So, the other thing that happens when you're first born is you don't have any other experience of any other way that things are supposed to be. This is the play you landed in. This is the movie you're in. So, for me, I thought that's what life was. I thought nobody gets, even though you're absolutely right, this sense of the brain putting things together, even though we all know as adults that needs to happen, when you don't know that as a baby, you don't have that information. You don't have that information. So you think what you've been born into is the way the world is, which gives us, how many times have you worked with people, and I do it now, the most common debilitating belief they have is, well, that's the way of the world. Which means they can't change, which means this is their life. It's set in concrete and I can't do anything about it. So I thought Nobody gets fed when they're hungry. Nobody has to worry about diapers. Nobody gets cuddled. I'm okay. So fast forward to I'm about 18, 19 months old, and it may be 16 months, but I'm not quite 2. And the popcorn story. And very quickly, I walked into the living room. My mother, who was very pregnant with my sister, was sitting there, and I found some leftover popcorn from the night before. I was hungry. I ate it. I put all this popcorn into my body. Well, I don't have teeth. I gummed it. I swallowed it all in, and it blocked up my digestive system, and I almost died. And by some miracle, the doctor, who I think suspected something was off with my mom, he did a house call, and back then people did house calls. So he came by the house, and my mom said, "Oh yeah, her belly's distended and she's pretty warm and quiet." And he said, "Uh-oh." Well, turns out I had a very blocked digestive system, and he got that out of me and took care of me, but then he started coming by every week with food and made sure I got fed. But my mom also told me that after that incident, and she used to, by the way, she would tell this story to anybody who'd want to hear it, which was like, do you not see what you're saying about who you are as a mother when you
Oh,
tell this
yeah.
story? It was almost like she was bragging, but she said, "Well, I'm just bragging about how you chose to live." And it's like, all right. Well, the doctor would come by and feed me, bring me food, bring me good baby food, and make sure I had food. And my mom would say, "Yeah, this curiosity," because she said I was always pretty happy and zooming around, especially once I got my legs and could get out of the crib. I was zoom around and I was very curious, even though I was very small. Well, I was very small because I wasn't being fed. I was malnutritioned. And so when the doctor started feeding me, and it's like I picked up on this sense of, I'm in trouble here. I'm living in a house where I'm not safe and I'm not getting what I really need. And here's this man that's coming in and making sure I get what I need. And he would hold me on his lap and he would feed me. And just having that contact with a human being, I longed for it. I remember wanting it so much. And so it was around then that I remember this too, even though I was just barely 2 years old. I remember when I couldn't sleep, I would tell myself this story, because here I had this experience of this man, this doctor, caring for me. And I knew having another human being care for me was somehow really important. So my imagination went wild and I created this whole story. And by the way, a lot of kids have this story when they get mad at their parents. They say, "I'm waiting for my real mom and dad to come and get me." It happens all the time.
Yeah.
But I took it to this level of, that was my survival mechanism, because I knew I was in trouble. And if I was going to survive, I had to do something about it. So in my imagination, I created this survival story where my real parents, they would hug me all the time. They made sure I was cuddled for hours. They would feed me great food. They gave me great clothes, and I was so happy and cared for. But I think it was right around then that I started telling myself this story, and that's how it would. Interestingly enough, I wondered, and I'll bring this up to you. As I got older and got into meditative practices, they used to always say visualization is as good as the experience. Your brain, when you're visualizing, your brain doesn't know the difference between reality and what you're visualizing. And I've often wondered if that's what gave me the strength to survive. I mean, I still had issues, believe me. It wasn't until I did this work after my father died that I really started making some impact. But I often wondered if that's why I even made it out of that horrible experience, because the stories I was telling myself, visualized and imagined, were they strong enough to give my brain a pathway to work with to get me here? Does that make sense?
It totally does. Yeah. Yeah. Just the idea of that it's like your brain found an alternate path, I think. And it's just, I think the body's resilient that way too. You hear stories about if vessels are blocked in our body, that our body has the ability to produce, for example, alternate capillaries,
Yep.
alternate routes for our blood to flow. So, when you think about your own mind, your brain, and the trauma that it was experiencing, sort of through these conditions that you're living in, and then you get this doctor who shows up, which is a very hopeful. I mean, it was like a lifesaver with the popcorn story for sure, but then the
Yeah.
continual expression of support and showing it's the first person maybe that showed up for you
Yeah.
consistently. He's
Yeah.
providing food and
Yeah.
sustenance. So it's almost like maybe that sort of opened up that pathway in your brain to say, there's another way. This is
Yes.
this is what
Yes.
love looks like. And then your
Yes.
brain then starts to maybe go with that, right? Now
Yeah.
the imagination and the hope and I think just I don't know, I almost feel like it manifested then that ability for you to use your brain to work for you now,
Yes.
because you saw there is another way. And even
Yes.
at that young age, I think we underestimate sometimes with young children and babies what we're capable of.
Yep. I
And
agree.
yeah, cognitively, you were putting the pieces together already on your own, especially with that doctor coming into your life, even though your mom was basically had checked out much of the time, right?
Yeah.
Even when she was checked in, she was, it sounds like, often distant or preoccupied, distracted with much of her own trauma and stress and things that she had to do. But I definitely agree with you. I think that your brain ultimately, it found another path, and I think that was probably one of the big keys to your survival, really, and
Absolutely. And
yeah.
I will say this. You know how you talked about the body will find new routes if you have a problem with capillaries,
Mm.
it'll
Yeah,
reroute stuff, and it does that.
it does, yeah.
That's another reason why some people will say to me, "Well, you made it through that, I didn't." And it's like, you always can. Your brain is always open to changing the pathways.
Yes, I believe that.
Your brain will always help you change the story. The brain ultimately wants coherence. They want to make sense of where you are. The challenge is, are you willing to help your brain reprogram itself? Because and this isn't not a straight analogy, but your brain operates as an operating system on a computer.
Yes,
Your brain is a billion times more sophisticated and mysterious than a computer, but your brain does like coherence. It does like to organize the information. So if you will help it, you can even say, "Hey, brain, we're going to reorganize this information. I'm going to change this story because I have new information." And that's what worked for me. When I started taking apart, and I'm going to go right into the origin story. When I started taking this all apart, the only way I could really make peace of the trauma and the lack of care, because believe me, I blamed and hated my parents and family forever. It was a non-negotiable. I wasn't gonna have anything to do with these people once I could get away from them. But getting away from them meant I didn't change anything in myself. I just ran away, which meant I brought it with me. If you don't rewrite the script, you still have it in your back pocket to
you
refer
do.
to. So, I had to look at why. I had to look at why.
Mhm,
So, when I understood my origin story, I then said, "Okay, I have to take this back another level. What's their origin story?"
mhm,
And what I discovered, my parents were first generation Americans. My mom was one of 13. They were farmers, and they didn't have the kids because they wanted to have a loving, large family. They needed workers on the farm.
yeah,
That was their survival mechanism, was to have a large family, so you have people to help out, and we all survive together. That is such a primal genetic priority for us, this survival, and because of our early, early beginnings as surviving in groups, you could not be born out in the desert by yourself and figure out a way to survive. You needed the village. You needed the other people in the cave to help you to find food and to survive and to fight off the bad things. So that is such a basic monkey brain feel for
Yes.
us to have
Yes.
that group think survival. And that's where my mom and her 13 kids in the farm, she wasn't wanted as a loving daughter. She was a part of the production line. Plus, that poor woman having 13 kids, yikes.
Yikes. Yeah,
That's
for
just
sure.
and my grandmother was one of 23. So, it was this passed down tradition of having these large families because that's the way you survived.
Yes.
My father was from Italy, so he had a whole different set of issues to deal with, and it certainly was women, "Yeah, what am I gonna do with a bunch of females?" And he had 3 daughters, and he had 1 son, so his 1 son was the king, and the 3 of us were,
Mm,
throw away. So I had both of these people who had their own issues when they came into life, because they came into, my father, his parents had these high expectations for him that he was going to be the superhero of the family, and all he wanted to do was gamble. But my grandfather was a gambler too, so he got that whole feeling of there's 2 ways you make money. You either work hard and earn it, which was from my mom's side and my dad's side, or you win it and you become you win at
mhm.
gambling. And my dad was a really smart guy and could have been successful. I often thought if he were alive today, he'd be on Vegas poker tours and be pulling in the money. He was born just a couple of centuries too soon, I think. He would have been cleaning up in Vegas today with all the gambling, legal gambling and the poker that's going on. So maybe at this point he's reincarnated and he's having a ball doing that. I hope so. But when I looked at their beginnings, it wasn't that I said, "Okay, you're right. You had every right to treat me that way." No, I didn't say that. I said, "I understand why. I
Mm.
understand why I had these beginnings."
It makes total sense. Just the way you laid that out, the idea of sort of the monkey brain components, I think, too. I wish they would teach that in schools, to be honest with you now.
Honestly,
Just some
I agree.
basics on how
I agree.
the brain works, how we were wired not for we were wired for survival, I think.
That's it.
And
That's
we
it.
all
And
we all
and it, it, and
yeah.
and continuing the race.
Yes, in a sense, in belonging, and we're wired for community, but especially that, like you said, having a large family to have more hands, to do the work in the fields. All right. And if you go back, further centuries, it would be maybe for protection against the
Yes.
neighboring tribe or
Yes.
so I think people sometimes overlook that the brain is not necessarily wired for our evolving or our success or our growth. The brain loves predictability. It loves familiarity. It loves safety. So I think, like you said, one of the big challenges here is changing the patterns, right?
That's it.
Understanding how we are wired and then realizing gonna have to do some work, right? Take some self-awareness for sure, but then realize you're gonna have to do some work. And let's face it, I think
Absolutely.
sometimes I always say thinking is heavy lifting. Thinking is hard work, especially thinking about thinking. When you start talking about that, a lot of people just tune out. They're like, "Well, I just want my brain wants the easy answer. I want the binary. Give me Ford or Chevy, Pepsi or Coke, this or that." And it's interesting how, in many ways, we've become very tribal, in our nation, even through things like
Yes.
politics or
Yes.
religion, where, you got to dig. You have to
Yes.
realize that's just your lizard brain wanting
Yes.
easy
Yes.
answers,
Yes. Yes.
oversimplified explanations. And if there's one thing I think that if we could just break that, right? If we could say, look, we're complex beings in a complex society. We have complex emotions. We have to put in a little bit of legwork thinking,
Well,
right? And it pays
exactly.
off. Yeah, go ahead. What were you
Exactly.
gonna say to that?
No, well, you're absolutely right. Your brain does like coherence. It does like organization. It
Yes.
does like to keep you on the path. Keep you on the path. But if you notice something in the world today, the divisiveness isn't landing well anymore.
No,
People aren't happy. People are feeling more lonely and isolated. I have 15 emails and texting and communication. I have 15 email addresses. I'm not kidding. And you can call me, you can text me, you can write to me. There's so many ways we can reach each other, and yet we feel lonelier than ever.
for sure.
We don't feel seen. We don't feel seen. We don't feel heard. And the reason for that is our brains are so focused on this pathway that we don't know how to bring ourselves into that story. And what I mean by that is because you said the word belonging, because when you're born and you feel the way to survive is to get a sense of belonging in this group you've found yourself in, that you landed in their movie, and you want to feel like you're a part of that group, so you take on the characteristics of that group.
Yes.
I always laugh and say I can tell when I'm at a lawyer's convention because they speak legalese with the herefore to nows and the notwithstandings and the wherefores, and it's like whatever, oh, okay, you're a lawyer. And doctors, they speak in medical terms, even I don't know what other when they're
Hmm.
not working, but language is one of the first things we pick up on to know we belong. But at the same time, your subconscious and unconscious is picking up all these other things that people are doing. You're observing how they react with money. You're observing what love means in the family, what the woman's role is. Come on, that's the first thing we're taught. Yay, a boy. Oh, a daughter. I love her clearly, but.
Yes. Yes.
So it's these things get put into us. Then society takes over and we because that's our foundational story, we usually are drawn to that experience in society once we go into school. When I went into school, the little girls wore dresses and the boys had to wear ties, and they still had spanking in school
Me
when I
too.
went to
Yeah.
first grade. But they never spanked the girls. They only spanked the boys because, young ladies are shamed into being a better young lady. We don't need to spank them. We've got a more powerful tool in shaming. So you've got all of this that contributes, and now you're older and you're miserable. And you think, well, maybe if I go to church more, that'll give me my answers. Or maybe if I stick with my career more, that'll give me my answers. Or maybe if I sign up with this group, that'll give me my answers. Because they seem to think like I do. But the one thing we're missing is, who am I in all of that?
Yes.
And instead of focusing on which group you belong in, or how do I mold myself to fit into that group? Who am I? And it's like you said, that's where the thinking and the awareness has to come in.
It is so true. And I know this will be even a whole other podcast topic, but I feel like then when you look at technology and the way that that's developed, that's almost become kind of like the false drug to sort of cover all of that sense of belonging, right? Because like you said, I think we're living at a time where people are more disconnected and more lonely and more alienated and feel more isolated. And of course, the pandemic contributed to that too and just sort of amplified it. But I think sometimes the growth of technology masks it because people equate likes or shares or follow the number of followers or, those things with, look, I have this amount of friends
Yeah,
on Facebook. Look,
yeah,
I have this amount of likes. I have this amount of whatever. And so it almost creates a false environment, almost like a pseudo sense of belonging. But like what you were saying too, just about sort of those foundational values that you were growing up in. And like you said, when you're young, you don't realize those things are kind of part of systems. I was thinking of the word patriarchy, when you were talking about some of the systems that you grow up in. And I can relate to this a lot too, because I was born and raised in southwestern Pennsylvania. So listeners, I mean, Carrie was brought up in the Pittsburgh area. I was too. So I identify my grandfathers were coal miners. We had a lot of agriculture there from the Eastern Europeans. You can probably tell with my last name, Slavosky, Eastern European. I'm half Italian too. So like I connect with that, but it's just sort of the factories, the steel mills. I just always remember my grandparents even sort of equating when they would talk somebody's sense of value by the kind of worker. They would start off a conversation. Well, she's a good worker. He's a good worker. They wouldn't talk about their character, like, oh, she's a very honest young lady, or she's a very joyful or very compassionate.
Yeah.
It was they would go to, he's a worker. So these
Hard worker. Hard worker
hard
was the
worker,
best. He's
and it
a
would be
hard worker.
yes, it would be over and over again. So, like you
Yep.
said, men kind of had their place, which usually more top of the food chain. Like you said,
Yep.
daughters, women, you're not going to get as many of those opportunities, right? You're going to
Mhm.
be just like the old programs reinforced, right? The Leave It to Beaver, the Brady Bunch. What was Carol Brady doing, right? I mean, she was doing her thing, right? In the kitchen and doing the childcare. So I think that I don't know. And then if you pull religion into it too, for me, I grew up in Catholicism. That was just one more part of that story for me because it was a
Yeah.
sense of order in the Catholic Church for me growing up. You follow these rules, you do these sacraments, you do them in this order. If you don't do this, then there's the threat of what? There's the threat of hell, or there's the threat of excommunication from the church, which you
Yeah.
talk about some of the things. That's why I will tell people they have to get this book, but you cover a lot of these sort of systems in ways that I think it almost contributes to the story being set up. It's almost like the setting for the story.
Mhm.
And so I see a lot of that too, just hearing you talk about it, how, because I know like in my own life, how religion kind of played that, follow the rules. And I remember you mentioned in the book, do not question, right? When you question something, which I remember that story in the book when you were a little girl, and I think you questioned the priest in some way, and I was just like, "Oh my, I got to read this because I know that is something
It
you
it
do
was
not
my
do."
first it was my first confession, my
Yeah,
very first confession, and of course, I had the mean old Monsignor, and and he said, "You have to go to church." It's like, "How am I gonna go to church if my mom doesn't drive me?" Oh my god,
yeah.
Who?
How
Oh,
dare you question
oh
this?
my
Yeah,
god.
yeah. So, but
But you know what? Now I think about it, even though at the time it was so horrible, I've done a lot of meditations, and I've gone back, and when she walks out of that confessional, I'm standing there, "Well done, baby, well done." I'm cheering her on. It's like, you question all of them. You question every single one of these guys.
I love it. Yeah,
Yep.
I love it. You discuss the potential pitfalls and harmful effects of repeated stories in our
Yeah.
lives and how they can sort of almost get into a sense of autopilot or default status if we don't check them, right? If we don't question them or revise them. We tend to just maybe go with the status quo. I think you said it can almost become like Groundhog Day,
Yep.
where we get stuck in things like unresolved trauma, maybe guilt, a lack of understanding about our situation. And I think a big one you mentioned too is fear, right? Because
Mhm.
that can be so crippling and just so limiting. That sense of fear and uncertainty that keeps us trapped in repeating the same stories. As it relates to this idea, I remember you pointing out too that for so long a few stories kept running for you, like feeling that need to prove that you deserved your family's love. Also, that sense that you had that you needed to be responsible for other people's happiness. I think you mentioned your parents' happiness. Could you elaborate more on the harmful effects of like repeated stories that don't serve us and how things like fear and shame and unresolved trauma can get in the way for so long?
Whew, that's a lot.
It is.
That's a lot there. Um, Going back to the brain likes the patterns.
Yeah.
And when you have a story that keeps repeating, and I think there's a lot of women in the audience that'll understand this one. As a female, as a woman, when I wanted to go on a different path than the one that was prescribed for me. For example, my parents thought when I told them I wanted to go to college, it wasn't that I was expecting them to pay because they weren't going to, but they were so totally against me going to college. All I needed to do was get a husband and get married. So it was drilled into me to be a wife, a mother, a housekeeper. So dating was difficult for me because it was in conflict with something very fundamental about me. And something very fundamental about me was that I had this determination and which helped me survive, but I also had this drive for more. I had this drive to be me. I didn't know who I was, and I tried so long to shove that part of me away. I really wanted to belong and fit in. My parents humiliated me by calling me a black sheep. "Don't even try to get Carrie to go along. She's never gonna do what we want her to do." And they didn't do it with a sense of love and admiration, they did it with this sense of shame. So I tried really hard to be what they wanted me to be, but I couldn't. I
Mhm.
couldn't. And I kept repeating this thing of, I really have to try to be this other person. And dating was horrible because I kept dating people that I'd have to please and looking if I was always drawn to these guys who really didn't want anything to do with me. And it was under this guise of if I could get this guy to want me, I could prove my dad wrong.
Mhm.
I
Okay.
didn't realize I had this whole underlying thing that I could prove my dad wrong, that I was lovable, I did deserve his love, I did deserve his care. And funny, when he died when I was 24, and that's in the book. I don't think I really go into this that much in the book, but one of the biggest feelings I had was, how am I ever gonna get his love now? I
Okay.
don't have any chance to get his love. So, I started dating more guys that I wasn't gonna get their love either. It became this really detrimental pattern that I had to go out with these guys who were terrible for me, and yet they were the perfect foil in my story to help me solve this issue of I've got to get my dad's love. It wasn't until I saw that pattern, I thought, "Oh my god." And I realized I never really dated guys for more than a couple weeks, maybe a month, but they just hated me. I was dating these guys that I had no business. They were just terrible for me. And it took me a while to really understand that pattern. And when I did, Simon came into my life.
Mhm.
And he came into my life as a friend, and it was interesting. I had this other pattern of, ooh, I'd meet a guy and I'd say, "Ooh, I wonder if he's the guy for me." And my wondering like this, my wondering was, can I get him to love me and prove my dad wrong? Well, it didn't happen like that with Simon. Simon and I became friends. We were friends, and he was British, and I was in England for a summer, which was a dream of mine to always live in England. And he was over there visiting his family, and there were so many little magical kismet things that happened to get us together. And we met for dinner, and all of a sudden, it's like, I think I'm in love with you. And I was like, ah, but you're not my dad. I don't have to get you to love me. But interestingly, when we got together, I tried to become the little woman. I cleaned the house, I did the grocery shopping, I did the cooking, and I was miserable. I hate cooking, I hate cleaning, and I'll tolerate grocery shopping. And so I had to leave him. I left him. I was staying at his house when I came back from England, and I left him. And he stuck with me though, and he kept saying, "What are you doing? What's going on?" I said, "I can't take care of the house. I can't be that person." He said, "Who asked you to?"
Mhm.
And it was that one question, and I went, "Yeah, who asked me to?" And I said, "That's my marriage script.
Mhm.
That when you get into a relationship and it's serious, you have to become the house back to my parents. I have to be
Sure.
the homemaker. I wasn't going to have kids. I was a little bit older, not going to happen, but I had to be the homemaker and the support of his career. And
So you're kind of reverting back to, yeah,
yes,
back to home base, so to speak,
yes,
back to that
yes.
story.
But
Yeah.
that was years of this pattern of, and that's just one example. That's just the
Yeah.
love example. I got tons of them, tons of repeated patterns with work and with friendships and everything. But that's where, when you don't take that apart, and again, I was fortunate that I had a partner that just, it was just that sentiment, who asked you to?
Right. Triggered that, for you to think of that in a different,
Yes.
yeah.
And Simon loves to cook, and he's out grocery shopping right now, and we hired somebody to clean the house. You don't want me cleaning your house, folks. I'm terrible at it. I don't like it, I get no joy from it, but I love a sparkling clean house, and, but but it
Yeah.
was so f now I feel so free that I can say to Simon, "You do it." When you go, he loves to go grocery shopping, go figure. Ugh.
Amazing. No, it's just, it's amazing how that kind of played out for you, and just, but for so long, you didn't see that connection, and then just him saying that got you to step back and kind
But
of like,
that's
who is asking you to do, Yeah,
but
it's, yeah.
but that's what you said is how first of all, do you recognize the pattern,
Hmm.
and what's the impact on your life? That's why I always say to people, don't be afraid of patterns, but get a coach to help you see them.
Sure.
Because sometimes you do need that person saying, "Who asked you to?"
Right. It's almost like connecting the dots, right? I think that's what coaches help us do sometimes. It's like we have the bits of information out in front of us, but sometimes we have maybe the blinders on, maybe just a blind spot, or, we don't have clarity, and just being able to be challenged with some questions, because that was really a question. It wasn't an accusation that Simon made. It was just a very pure question. And I think questions get the brain, once again, let's go back to the brain. It's almost like the brain becomes Google, right? And
Yeah.
we start searching. Well, oh, you're right. Nobody asked me to. So it's
Yeah.
amazing how questions, I often say that I think questions are often more important than answers. And I
Honestly.
think having a good coach, or a good therapist, or even a good friend, and,
Mhm.
uh, and that's another interesting part of your book, how it kind of started, and maybe get into that in a little bit, how a friend of yours kind of really asked you or challenged you in a way. But I mean, I think it's those questions sometimes that are just so pivotal in getting us to kind of search our minds, search our souls. And I think as long as we can stay curious too, right, is another thing that's important. When we do start to do those, the introspection with the questions, that we do it in a way that's not, I don't know, judgmental. And I think that's another
Yeah.
good aspect that a coach, they can help us just to be observant and kind of
Yes. Yes.
stand back and observe and be
Yes.
curious.
Yes.
And, but I do have a question about your dad, because you brought him up in this previous question. And I know for you, reading the book, that was a very poignant, kind of pivotal time in your life. I think it was a tremendous catalyst for transformation for you too. In what ways do you think your dad's passing served as like an impetus for you in terms of making some changes and pivots in your life?
Well, when dad died, it was very confusing because for the first 23 and a half years of my life, I got nothing. Nothing. He barely acknowledged me. One time when I was 10, he did apologize for not being willing to take care of me. I don't have that in the book, but he did say to me, "I'm really sorry that I just don't have it in me to be a good father to you." And at the time, all I said was, "That's okay, Dad, you gave me life." And it's like, oh my god, I think about that and how I let him off the hook. But he was
Mhm.
my hero. Dad was my
Yeah.
hero. And then on the night that he died, he said, "I love you." Just knocked me over and just confused the crap out of me. And especially when I then go out to meet my friend and I couldn't do it. I just had pain all over my jaw and I came back and he had died. And I was like, What? He
Mhm.
just told me he loved me. I thought maybe our relationship was gonna I finally got his love. What happened?" so that just blew me away, and I hit rock bottom. I started drinking. My meals became beer and more beer. I lost a lot of weight. I was miserable, and it just made me it broke me. It broke me, and I was already pretty broken. I had so much psychological and emotional pain from the trauma and the lack of connection, of any meaningful connection, and then to say you love me the day you die? What the hell is that all about? That's just cruel. Why didn't you just die without saying anything? What the hell? And I went into a tailspin, and I couldn't make sense of it. And funnily enough, I went to see a priest at the local Catholic church because I was confused. I was really lost. And I said, "Why did he die?" and all this, and the priest gave me this whole big hubbub about, "Jesus died for you, so your father dying is nothing compared." And I thought, "Okay." So I just said, "Yeah, you're useless," and I walked out of that meeting, and that just sent me on a space of I had to find out why. And it started with why with my dad, or why couldn't he love me, or why was he really loving me but never showing it? Because
Mhm.
that was the other thing. Did he really love me all along but didn't like me, and that's why he wouldn't take care of me? He even apologized to me for not being, "I'm sorry, I just can't be a father to you. I'm just not interested." I mean, who says that to a 10-year-old? "I'm just not interested. I can't do it." Okay, well, what do you want me to how do you want me to take that? You've already had me raise myself as a baby. I had to take care of my baby sister and protect her from our crazy mom. And now a 10-year-old, now you're telling me you're not interested. Where do I go with that? And then he dies saying I love did he so when the priest turned out to be completely the wrong direction, I looked elsewhere. I looked at Buddhism, and I don't know why I turned to religion so much, but then spirituality became the theme, and I turned to metaphysics. And I was very cynical. I'm still cynical about a lot of stuff with metaphysics. I'm cynical about everything. I question everything. But even as a kid, I question, I asked any 7-year-old who will say something to a Monsignor is like, that's my pattern. I question everything.
Me too.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah. So I just asked a lot of questions, and I
Mhm.
just went on this exploration. And I'm still on the exploration. I'm
Yes.
still and I often say writing the book was another excavation of so many other things. Even though I really feel like I'm definitely not anywhere near the person I was when I first came onto this planet, but I still feel there's more I'm gonna do. So that questioning has continued to work with me to keep searching for even more answers and even more direction. But dad's death really did that. It was just so confusing.
Yes. Mm.
And so I just went and asked, "Why did my dad do that? Why?" And, I had all these you wouldn't believe some of the answers you'd get from people. "Well, you picked this family because you wanted to have these lessons." Okay, fine. But why? What am I supposed to get from him all of a sudden announcing he loves me? Did he just do that because he didn't want one of the things I thought with one religion was he wanted to make sure he didn't go to hell for not loving me, so he wanted me to know he loved me. So I said, "Okay, so it's back to him
Mm.
being a selfish narcissist. Alright, sure. Still nothing to do I need to know what's in me." Okay, so he's gone, he's dead. He'll deal with his issues wherever he is. How do I deal with this?
Yes. Yeah.
And it meant I really had to look at the pain I was in, how deeply pained I was, hurt's not the right word, it was the pain of not being seen or appreciated or valued by my own family, the root family, the original source of belonging. And looking at that pain was not easy, but
No.
boy, did it
No.
help.
Yeah, that's powerful because at that point, just like things just got literally blown into 1,000 pieces, like you said. And then there you were, because he's not around anymore to give any context or explanation. Like, Dad, why would you tell me you loved me you just have to go on, try to pick up all the pieces and make some sense of, where do I go from here? What does this even mean when he said that? I just can't imagine that had to be so challenging, so disorienting. I would think that's the other thing. The word disorienting came to my
Yep.
mind. When
Yep.
when you first found out he passed away, literally what, hours after saying that to
Yep.
you,
Yep.
that just had to be, oh,
But here's the thing. Here's the thing. It doesn't matter.
Thanks for joining me on this episode of Perfect Whelm. If you're feeling inspired but unsure how to move forward, I'd love to help you create a personalized plan. Schedule a free discovery call with me, and let's talk about how one-on-one coaching can help you gain clarity, overcome obstacles, and begin experiencing the growth and change you are seeking. Simply head to the link here, eric@ericslavosky.com, and email me about booking a call. I'm excited to connect with you. And if you enjoyed this episode, please follow or subscribe, rate, and leave a review. Your support helps others discover the show. Thanks again for listening, and I'll see you next time on Perfect Whelm.